Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and with me today is, of course, Peter Lavelle, co-founder of The Gaggle and host of Artie's talk show Crosstalk. NATO, as we have often said, but was surprisingly echoed not so long ago by President Emmanuel Macron of France, is brain dead. And in response, NATO boss Stoltenberg commissioned a group of experts to chart a way forward to demonstrate that NATO's brain is functioning with great acuity. Well, anyway, this group of experts has come up with a report called NATO 2030, for its plans for the next decade. There's nothing very much new in it. What has caught the media attention is the mention of China. China is the coming thing. China is the problem that NATO will have to address. However, much of the document is actually still preoccupied with Russia. And the language that it uses about Russia, which is all about Russian aggression, Russian violation of international law, Russian threat to NATO, is very different from the language it uses about China. China is seen as a challenge, a long-term problem, but it doesn't use any of this vitriolic language that it reserves for Russia. Now, NATO, these NATO experts haven't come up with any ideas as to what are they going to do about China. It's all very well saying, well, China's a big problem, but what are you going to do about it? And how is NATO, a military alliance, equipped to deal with a power, a giant economic power that projects its power through economic means, and that is actually nowhere even near in the physical vicinity of NATO. So once again, NATO is coming up with a lot of verbiage, but few serious ideas about moving forward. All right, what's your take, Peter?
Well, I read the article in the New York Times, the link you sent me here. A couple of very just off the top of my mind things is that the first two letters of NATO is North Atlantic. Okay, so I don't know why they're talking about China. Okay. Also, NATO came into being as a result of the beginning of the Cold War. Okay, and I think it was a legitimate idea. Fine. Okay. It was famously said NATO was necessary to keep the Germans down, the Americans in, and the Russians out. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, the Second World War has been over for 75 years. The Cold War has been over for almost 30 years now. Obviously, NATO is brain dead. Macron, a person I very rarely agree with, was absolutely spot on that. And he's not the only one that has said this. And it's been said off and on with greater frequency since the end of the Cold War. I get jabbed at it all the time on Crosstalk for questioning the necessity of NATO. And I just said, there's a whole cottage industry on this. I mean, it's not like I'm an original thinker and saying we should shut down NATO. I mean, people are clamoring for it because it has no need. And as a matter of fact, when the last time Europe was really threatened was not Russia, it was immigration in 2015. And well, where was NATO? Where was your nice, shiny military machine? You didn't protect the borders. As a matter of fact, this diving deep and hard thinking about what NATO should do doesn't even mention about the defense of its European members, which are the primary overwhelmingly the majority of the members of this military alliance. But also it talks about how they need to strengthen, we've said this before on the Gaggle, and I've said it many times on Crosstalk, is that NATO needs to deeper and deeper development with the EU. Of course, that's why the United States was so upset about the UK leaving the European Union, because what is Macedonia? How does that add to NATO's security? How does that add to a farmer in Iowa? How does that add to that person's security? No, it's not. It has nothing to do about Macedonia. Every member of the European Union, they want to fuse into NATO because NATO, the European Union, is the ultimate back door for NATO to get what it wants. Okay, and so, and I wish I was the first to say this, George, but I think George F. Kennan said it before he died at a very old age, is that NATO is searching for a reason to exist. And this working paper they came up with, and that's, that was just given lavish coverage by the New York Times as usual here. This is what it's about. They're searching for a reason to exist. And there's 5,000, at least last count I know, 5,000 bureaucrats in Brussels that are, from what I understand, paid pretty well. It's a pretty good grift. All you have to do is say, there's threats. And if there's, and of course, when it comes to Russia, I mean, again, when Russia invaded Ukraine, my favorite question on Crosstalk would be, okay, so when did that happen?
Right.
And the guest would always go, let me finish it. It's a good point. It's a good point. I say, okay, you don't have to know the exact date of the month. Oh, you don't know the month either. Maybe the season of the year. Okay, there's no fact checking here. Sorry, I'm a blowhard tonight. Go ahead.
Well, the point is that NATO, if it were just a matter of, okay, well, we've got a whole bunch of bureaucrats and they need jobs and they need paychecks and let's just keep it going because we don't want to put a whole bunch of people on the dole. I mean, we could say, okay, well, why not? It's just, jobs, governments do this all the time, keep jobs going. NATO is actually a public menace, and it's through, it's trying to find missions for itself to justify its continued existence. It is now, I think, the #1 threat to peace and security in the world. I mean, if we just look at the record of the past 30 years, I mean, its intervention in the Balkans in the 90s was driven by an attempt to find relevance. They had to find some relevance. Why are you keeping this going? The Warsaw Pact has been dissolved. Humanitarian intervention. We got to save Europe from these terrible crises in the Balkans because of all the horrible things that might happen as a result. So then they had, after the humanitarian intervention, then it was the global war on terror. That's it. We're on board for the global war on terror. We got to fight the Islamic terrorists. Though they forgot about the Islamic terrorists and shipping the Islamic terrorists into the Balkans to fight the Serbs, but never mind that. After the global war on terror, it's back to humanitarian intervention in Libya. Then they thought of other missions. Hey, what about liberating the women? Yes, that's it. Our mission is to liberate the women of the world, women in Afghanistan, women living in Islamic countries. They're all looking to NATO. Then we've had the climate change. Yeah, NATO's fighting climate change. Then, thankfully, Russia came back on the horizon. That's it. They got Russia. But of course, by the NATO powers doing what they did in Ukraine, intervening in the way they did, and that was all about NATO, because that agreement, the association agreement with the EU that was rejected by Viktor Yanukovych, a key part of that agreement, which was obnoxious to Yanukovych and the people who had voted for Yanukovych, was integration of Ukraine within the NATO security structure. That was anathema to Yanukovych, and was definitely anathema to Russia. And of course, we had the same thing in Georgia in 2008, where the promise of NATO membership led Saakashvili to launch his lunatic campaign against South Ossetia. So you can actually see how NATO's continued attempt to justify its existence is actually leading to security calamities.
The New York Times article, this paragraph just jumped out at me here, and it goes right along with what you're saying here. Quote, it recommends creating a center of excellence for democratic resilience and recommitting all members to the principles of NATO's founding treaty, who prologue commits to uphold, quote, the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. Okay, there you go. There's another mission for you, okay? Of course, they're gonna have to deal with Poland and Hungary within their ranks here, but, you know, oh, and another important thing that this white paper is discussing is that they have to move away from this unanimous, its process of coming to a decision unanimously. It used to be unanimous. Now they've kind of shifted their little rhetorical shift to, now we have consensus, which is, you know, saying, you know, we don't care what this country says, you know, we'll let that go. But so when you can't get a unanimous decision and then consensus is difficult, why don't we bring in other players like Israel, you know, and consult with them, okay, right, what the mission should be here. Right. I mean, we've said this before, and I adamantly believe it, is that these people, what they're doing is because NATO has no viable mission. I mean, they can't defend Europe. I mean, they really should just close shop now, okay? Right. And the militaries of these European members in the NATO alliance, I mean, it's pretty shoddy stuff, okay? You know, the British still have some kind of punch, the French to some degree, but that is for really their post-colonial world in Africa. And then Germany, well, it's a laughing stock, the Dutch, a laughing stock, and all these other countries, what are they gonna do? The latrine duty, okay? Or maybe, you know, do, you know, right, food service. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, NATO has always been the United States. That's always it. It's basically a fig leaf for the United States. Yeah, that's it. So hey, we've got a coalition. It's an international coalition. We got all our NATO partners are on board. But of course, the United States doesn't even bother consulting its partners. It doesn't give a damn what Slovakia thinks or what Hungary thinks or any other country what they think. I mean, you know, you're there just to obey orders. And we see when NATO decided to embark on this regime change operation against Gaddafi, I mean, no one was consulted. I mean, they didn't ask.
Leading from behind?
Yeah. Remember, even Germany.
That's a joke.
Remember, Germany was on the UN Security Council at the time. Germany abstained, so it didn't even support the Security Council resolution that NATO dishonestly claimed it was actually trying to enforce. So what kind of an alliance is it when Germany it doesn't even bother to vote for that Security Council resolution?
And when we have ample evidence year after year, public opinion polls in Germany's, there are majorities of citizens that want the Americans to leave their country militarily. The war has been over for 75 years. The Cold War has been over almost 3 decades now. Yeah. Okay, and that's what they say. I mean, it's kind of akin to what the Iraqis say. They say, right, we want you to leave, and the U.S. won't, and now the German. I mean, who would have thought you could equate Iraq and Germany in the same category here? No, one of the other things that's really important is that there's been within NATO ranks, I mean, again, the rank and file of the bureaucrats, is that really go total expansion, bring in Japan, Australia, New Zealand, okay? This is what they want to do. They want to globalize the alliance as a way to distort the United Nations, okay? Because they will call themselves the international community, okay? I mean, if that isn't Orientalism, I don't know what is, okay? But you know, we're the only civilized people in the world because we can bomb and we can kill and maim and we can print money forever. That's the civilized world. No, anyone that knows the history since the Cold War and the history of the alliance, this white paper they came up with is a laughing stock, and it's for the Anthony Blinkens of the world, okay, and Jake Sullivan's. This is the stuff that they dream about and live inside of, okay, that is completely devoid from reality. What NATO, if Europe is looking for security, then why doesn't it reach out its hand to Russia and say, well, your president in the year 2000, within months of becoming president, said that there should be a renegotiation of the security requirements and architecture of Europe. Why don't we do it? It's been reiterated 3 more times, okay? But no, you can't do that because, right, NATO needs an enemy. So it's Russia, it's climate change. We have to somehow fit China in there, but give us some time, we will, okay? And expansion, everyone's welcome. But no, but you're not welcome as one among equals. No,
that's the point. The expansion is really its go-to solution to all these problems. So when they say, well, we need to address the challenge of China, but they have no idea. I mean, what are you going to do about China? I mean, China is an economic power. You're a military power. So what are you going to do to compete with China? Oh, well, we just need to expand. So we got to just expand. And then what happens when you expand? Then you expand into Central Asia. You get in Tajikistan, you get Kyrgyzstan, you get Kazakhstan. So you're basically coming right up against China's borders. China is not going to tolerate this. No. And just as much as Russia hasn't really tolerated this. I mean, they see this as a direct threat. And every country in the world would regard a military alliance on its borders as a direct threat to its security. So that's what I mean. Like, NATO is just, by trying to come up with these new rationales, it is a very serious threat to world peace.
And Europe, its trading relationship with China, is it going to just, on the flip of a coin, say, well, we're part of NATO, we can't, and you're a threat to us, so we won't trade with you anymore? Europe will become so completely irrelevant. I mean, when you look at maps of the world, particularly in the West, Europe is always in the center. I mean, in the future, it's just going to be some little corner, an outpost, okay, of irrelevance here. This is what they can't comprehend. They can't comprehend is that, like you said, perfectly put, one is an economic power and one is an outdated, useless, but very dangerous military alliance. There's no symmetry there whatsoever.
Right.
No, and of course, one of the things that I very rarely am complimentary of the years during Boris Yeltsin was president of Russia, but he very astutely reached out to the Chinese and said, Central Asia, we don't have to be competitors there. We can work together. We can work together there. And they don't look at each other as competitors, okay? There's obviously more Chinese goods there, but a lot of migrant labor goes to Russia. So, with the migrant labor, that's how they generate revenue. They go home, they support economies that are very much tilted in the direction of China. It's kind of a win-win. And then when you have the Belt Road, which is for all of Central Asia, it's a huge win because it's infrastructure building there. I mean, these mandarins over in Brussels and the New York Times, they don't understand that. Do you think that the people of Tajikistan are just jumping up and down on a trampoline waiting to become members of NATO? I don't think so.
No, that's exactly right. And of course, all of this attempt to keep expanding, keep moving forward, basically it is something that is actually causing this serious likelihood of Russia and China actually forging a joint military alliance, because they both see this expanding NATO as a threat to one another's security. And basically, then you've got Russia and China together, and suddenly, Europe really becomes a very insignificant player in all of this. Now, if NATO had ever been serious about security, it should always have looked to Russia as a partner, as a number of German businesses, people who are actually trying to make money, see Russia as a partner. But that's not the NATO thinking. And so therefore, when Macron said, well, NATO is brain dead, you kind of wonder, well, how serious was he? I mean, he was, in a way, he was obviously trying to suck up to Trump. I mean, because it was Trump who more or less said in 2016, he didn't use the same words, but essentially, I can't quite see the purpose of NATO. I mean, what's it actually doing? So Macron wanted to echo this. And that's why I kind of think that, NATO, that it's now added China into the mix, in part as a response to Trump. I mean, I think that it's like they're always trying to find some new thing. It's like, well, we had all these other issues. now Trump is talking about China. So, okay, so let's bring in China. But now with this new crowd coming into Washington, apparently, I think it's going to be NATO will revert back, as you can already see in this report, to its fulminations against Russia. I mean, I think it's always, whoever's kind of pulling the strings in Washington is what they're really thinking about. So I think the China thing may be diminished, and it's again, Russia.
We're really getting to a moment of inflection here, because the Europeans have to really decide if they want to be a player or not. If they just want to be a subsidiary of the United States that doesn't have their interest, particularly interest at all. I mean, as we've pointed out a number of times, this is a fig leaf to make it look like it's the international community. But again, I'm not a big fan of Macron. But you even have German elites is thinking the same way. Right. I mean, the reconciliation of France and Germany after the Second World War is a true historic event. If you know history, it's really a remarkable thing. And so this spirit of reconciliation to come together, create unity, not the European Union. That was a step too far as I'm concerned, because people weren't asked about it. But I mean, if Europe wants to remain relevant, and I think Macron understands that, and there's been this talk over the years of a European military force where it would be independent of NATO, which the Americans are very much against, because these European army might have its own equipment. Oh, God forbid they make their own stuff and not buy it from us. Okay, right. But I mean, this is a huge tension going on, because Europe has to make some decisions, and pretty soon you can't kick this can down the road too much longer. It's basically you're going to have to fold, and you're just going to go where the wind blows you. I mean, if it's going to be a Trump or a Biden or Obama, you're always going to have to be reacting to that instead of your own interest here. I mean, the Nord Stream 2 saga, it tells you everything you need. I mean, they all talk about, threats. This is a threat. This is a threat. Well, what about energy security? The Europeans can't even decide on their own energy security.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And I think that it is a kind of a mystery, and it's been a mystery for the past 30 years, why the Europeans are going along with a military alliance that is clearly affecting their security adversely. I mean, you mentioned the flow of migrants. Well, that has something to do with the instability in the Middle East and North Africa, to which NATO has contributed mightily. It's not the United States doesn't suffer from this. This is entirely Europe. I mean, Europe is the one that has to, that's where they're going to go. So of course, it's actually in the US interest to stoke up problems on Europe's periphery, and then watch Europe struggle to cope with it. Same with, you had the stark images back in the 90s when they were bombing Yugoslavia, and they were actually bombing the bridges over the Danube. So that's just cluttering up. All that debris was dumping into the Danube. How is that affecting, the Europeans? I mean, the Danube is a beautiful river, and the Europeans love it, and it's important for tourism. And thanks to this bombing, you've got you're just dumping garbage into the Danube. So again, you kind of wonder, how long can this go on? How long can the Europeans continue with an alliance that doesn't serve their interests, and which they can easily cope. They have the resources to defend themselves. France and the UK have nuclear weapons. The population of Europe is greater than that of the United States. I mean, their economy is collectively is greater than that of the United States. They don't need NATO. It's a mystery for why it continues.
One of the things, this has been really one of the great mysteries of the Trump era here, is because Trump, a number of times, particularly, I think it was in a national interest article that he claimed to have written, but I think it was a number of other people around him, and questioning the necessity of NATO, and then if NATO is going to go on, then you should pay for it. And one of the issues I've brought up is that if you give the Europeans the stark choice, I mean, if you want to keep this thing going, you're going to have to pay for it.
Yeah.
But if you're going to have to pay for it, then the Europeans are going to say, well, Russia really isn't a threat to us.
Yeah,
Okay, I mean,
maybe
we
not.
we can work it out. Okay, I mean,
Yeah.
because I mean, how many decades of austerity is Europe going to have to go through? And then somebody 3,000 miles away is saying, we want you to build you need some new tanks, and you're going to buy it from us. Okay, I mean, why? Why do we need that? Okay,
Right.
and so I still believe that's it. I mean, you have elite capture. I mean, you can look at this whole Navalny story, okay? In the intelligence community in Germany, there's elite capture there, okay? And that's one of the things. It's one of the insidious things that NATO and NATO-like organizations that are that where the Americans are the hegemon, is that you really target the elites to get them on your side. Bring them to seminars in the U.S. And then they visit each other in their own countries back and forth. I mean, you really do kind of suck them into the system there. And then you have a vested interest. I mean, it's a good gig, okay, and want to keep it going. And this has very little to do with the public opinion of these countries here. I mean, I don't have the freshest numbers now, but Russia is a threat to European Union countries. It's way, way low down there, okay?
Right.
Okay, but of course there are bureaucrats that they stake their entire livelihood and future on these, a threat to inflation, and that's why, no surprise, in this white paper the New York Times talks about, China's on the horizon. Good, we got to work on that threat too. Okay,
that's exactly. I mean, you're absolutely.
And they will make it.
Yeah,
and China will see that as a threat. See, they generate a threat that isn't even there.
That's right, and you're absolutely right. It is about the elite capture. And that's where they spend a lot of money. They, on all sorts of fellowship programs and, hospitality and invitations to this and invitations to that. And, always having security powwows and conferences. So they're always creating this NATO elite from every country because it's nice. There's a lot of money splashing around. So they bring them in, you've got Hungarians, and Slovenians, and Czechs, and everything. They all think, hey, this is really neat. We get all these lovely dinners and trips to the United States and so on. So yeah, that's exactly. It's actually, and that's why it also parallels what George Soros and his network.
I was just about to say.
Yeah, exactly. You buy people, you put them on the payroll, you flatter them, you give them lovely homes, and they get free trips all over the world, and that's what NATO is about, and that's and you're absolutely right. It has nothing to do with what the public desires.
Well, the interesting thing
none of NATO's wars have ever enjoyed public support.
Right.
I mean, neither the wars of the 90s, neither Libya, nor, we saw what happened, remember when, well, I mean, this is not quite NATO, but close to it, when Obama wanted to bomb Syria, and he said, okay, let's have a parliamentary vote on it. Boom, Parliament's right, we don't want to do this. And that's a parliamentary, that's conservative. These are conservative MPs who voted against it. So can you imagine any kind of NATO venture? You put it to a parliamentary vote and you do it in the Bundestag, and everyone will vote against it.
This goes back to my mantra about the professional managerial class, because for these people, these issues of national security are too important to let the people decide. We know better. I mean, Tony Blinken, he's a perfect example of it. And Jake Sullivan, okay, they are the managerial professional whiz kids, okay, and they just know better. The problem is with those two gentlemen is that everything they touch turns to shit, okay? And that's exactly what this professional managerial class does in foreign policy. I don't see any victories out there at all, none at all. No. All I see is, I see destruction, I see maiming, I see deficits, I see blowback.
That's right. And of course, and what NATO does do very well, I mean, apart from its co-opting elites and cultivating the educated young in all these countries, it's very good at public relations. It comes up with these documents full of these lovely sounding phrases. I mean, you quoted some of them, but values, rules-based order, democracy, human rights, women's rights, gay rights, multiculturalism, all of the buzzwords. And NATO is full of them. So, hey, these are all these wonderful values that we cultivate. So, cough up your money for your bombs and your planes, because we're going to promote all of those wonderful things that you like.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
The interesting thing is here is I'll give one thing to NATO. They have their own TV channel, NATO TV. I mean, isn't that wonderful? A military alliance with a smiley face. Okay, but they spend lavishly on soft power, lavishly.
Right.
I mean, NATO is benign. It's only projecting confidence and security. It's remarkable the doublespeak of these people, and it's very shallow, because there are people like us who will just take one paragraph and just ravage it and say, "This is stupid." Right. And it's naive, and don't con us anymore. We can read through your nonsense. And this piece in the New York Times, I mean, it's just an insult to intelligence. Okay.
Of course. And it goes like, when it co-opts people. Remember when it co-opted the actress John Voight's daughter, and her name escapes me. The famous actress who's involved in activism. Just escapes me, very famous actress. But that's an example. It was all about women, that somehow women are the great victims of war, and NATO is apparently against war. Hey, you've got a military alliance, but it turns out this military alliance is against war and is against all the terrible things that war does to women. I mean, it really is a kind of war is peace kind of 1984
well, it was when the surge was being considered in Afghanistan, and who led the fight? The editor of Time magazine. Right. I mean, they were leading the fight. Shaming Washington into saving the children of Afghanistan. Well, if we hadn't invaded Afghanistan and stayed there, those children probably would be more or less fine, considering Afghan reality. Okay.
We're saving.
I mean, why we need to go and, I mean, George, I went to Afghanistan, I went to Kabul, I was involved in interviewing then President Zarqai. And with just there a few days, I'm not obviously not an Afghan expert, but it was pretty obvious in the short amount of time I was there, they don't want us there. Yeah. Every Westerner, including Russians, have to have armed guards to the teeth as you move around. When you go into your hotel, it's like during the medieval times. You go in, the first gate opens up, you go in, and the gate closes behind you. They do a check of your car. Then the next gate opens up, and then you go to the next place, and then they close it, and they do another check. I mean, it takes like a half an hour to get through the driveway. Okay, it's because it's a dangerous environment, because there are real threats. Okay, that and somebody like Tony Blinken probably never went through that. Okay,
right, but that's the thing. We can see now that with if Blinken is indeed the next Secretary of State, it'll be a boost, a shot in the arm for NATO. I mean, NATO was not happy with Trump being there, because NATO doesn't want anyone asking questions about what the hell is it doing, going on year after year. Blinken and saying what Biden says, America's back. Oh, that's music to the ears of Stoltenberg and others. That's it. America's back. NATO's back. We've got lots and lots of missions to invent.
Well, I would say, considering NATO's age, since its inception to today, it is ripe for retirement. Put it on a pension, okay, and put it in a museum. And you can tell wonderful stories about how it saved Western civilization, while the same mandarins in power have done everything in their power to destroy Western civilization. That's a real story to tell.
Yeah, that's exactly. All right. Well, we will maintain our customary laser-like focus on the doings of NATO, and of course on everything else. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.